Part 4, Ofthe Spirituality of St. John Paul II from the beginning of his life. Although a very unassuming, self-taught man, Tyranowski was one of the greatest influences on the spiritual life of the young Wojtyla. Karol learned from Tyranowski how to develop his inner spiritual life, opening the path to a more intense prayer life lived in the constant presence of God so that his whole life would be transformed. Perhaps, the greatest impact that Jan Tyranowski had on the spiritual life of the future Pope, however, was when he introduced him to St. John of the Cross, sensing that the saint's spiritual poetry would appeal to the young student's love of literature. This, in turn, opened for Karol the door to Carmelite spirituality, which would have a profound spiritual influence on the rest of his life. It was a spiritual perspective that taught him the imitation of Christ through the complete handing over of every worldly security to the merciful will of God, which would become the defining characteristic of his own discipleship. And although it was Jan Tyranowski, who initially introduced Karol to the works of St. John of the Cross and St. Teresa of Avila, this was not the only Carmelite influence in his life, for during those formative years, occasional visits to the Discalced Carmelite monastery in Krakow would further imprint Carmelite spirituality on his spiritual life. Karol Wojtyla strongly felt that he was destined to be an actor, but that was not to be. His father's death on February 18, 1941, was to be the decisive moment that changed the course of his life. The loss of his father, the last living member of his family, began a process of detachment in his life. Orphaned before he was 21 years old, amidst the harsh reality of war and an increasingly intense spiritual life, Karol gradually came to the realization that he was called to an even greater destiny, to the priesthood. Later in life, he would describe those years as an evolutionary process of gradual clarification or interior illumination. At first, he wanted to enter the Carmelites, but Cardinal Adam Sapieha, the Archbishop of Krakow, convinced him that a man with talents such as his belonged not in a monastery but among the people as a diocesan priest. Karol Wojtyla made the definitive decision to enter the seminary in the fall of 1942. Because the Nazis had closed the archdiocesan seminary, Karol began his theological studies in secret while continuing to work in the Solvay chemical plant. Then, in the light of the increasing repression by the occupying Nazi regime, Cardinal Sapieha eventually moved the seminarians to his private residence where he set up an underground seminary. On November 1, 1946, Cardinal Sapieha ordained Karol Wojtyla to the priesthood in his private chapel. The following day, the young Father Wojtyla set off for Wawel Hill where he offered his first 3 Masses on All Saints' Day in the St. Leonard crypt of the cathedral. November 1 was a very unusual day for an ordination, but the cardinal had chosen it because he wanted to immediately send Father Wojtyla to Rome to begin graduate studies. There, he completed his doctorate in theology in just under 2 years and then returned to Poland. His first assignment was as a curate in the parish of the Assumption of the Blessed Virgin in Niegałek, a small village southeast of Krakow. Only 8 months later, the cardinal transferred him to St. Florian's parish in Krakow to work as a chaplain to students of the Jagiellonian University. He was well suited to the job and had great success. But seeing Father Wojtyla's talents, Cardinal Sapieha had other plans for him. Despite Wojtyla's protests, the cardinal released him from his duties in St. Florian's in September of 1951 and gave him a 2-year academic sabbatical to complete his habilitation thesis. After this, he began lecturing at the Jagiellonian University and the Catholic University of Lublin. Thanks for watching. Please share and subscribe for more. St. John Paul II, pray for we.